Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, the French president insists that France and Africa have begun a new phase as equals. But with military intervention in Mali, some are wondering if it's all just talk. Anousheh Hossein is our guest digital producer. She blogs at anoushehspoint.com. She's in for Malika. We've got a lot to talk about today in terms of France's relation with former French colonies. Some people are saying, oh, this is a huge new era, and others are saying this is just neocolonialism in some new gift wrapping.
Exactly, Lisa. There are various perspectives on this topic. Some of our online community members feel that France is committed to a different approach, and others think that neocolonial policies still exist. Oliver Woods commented, he says, while it is easy to castigate French involvement in Africa as neocolonialism, the reality is that it plays a largely constructive and supportive role in the region. But of course, this is a live show and we want to hear what you think, so tweet me using the hashtag AJStream.
And to Anousheh's right is Patrice Nganen. He is a Cameroonian writer, and his latest novel is titled La Saison des Prunes, also known as The Season of Prunes in English. It's about the lives of a group of Cameroonian soldiers who fought for France in the 1940s. Now, this book is going to be available starting April 6th. Patrice, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
We are glad to have you. Today, we are also joined by a number of guests via Google Plus Hangout who are going to take part in our conversation in just a minute. You can be in future Hangouts. Just go to the link below and add us to your circles.
I'm Bas Heijnen. I'm a writer and columnist for NRC Handelsblad, and I'm in the stream.
Has France successfully normalized relations with its former African colonies? In his election campaign last year, the French president, François Hollande, promised an end to neocolonial policies known as Francafrique. He pledged to begin a new phase with African states as equals.
Maintenant, vous dire ma volonté de renouveler la relation entre la France et l'Afrique. Le temps de ce qu'on appelait autrefois la France-Afrique est révolu. Il y a la France, il y a l'Afrique et il y a le partenariat entre la France et l'Afrique, avec des relations fondées sur le respect, sur la clarté et sur la solidarité.
However, ongoing military operations in Mali have raised questions about whether Hollande's promises are being kept. France has put more than 4,000 troops into Mali since January, and although Hollande has stated that France has no other goal than to stop terrorism, some observers say the mission goes beyond protecting the former colony from the threat of al-Qaeda-linked groups. Skeptics of France's ongoing presence in Western Africa suggest that the practice of Francafrique has not ended, but instead has just taken on a new face. So, is François Hollande living up to his promise of reshaping ties with Francophone Africa? Or does France's colonial past continue to cast a shadow over its new policy in the continent? To help us answer these questions, we're also joined via Skype from Paris by Vincent Hugo. He is the Africa and Middle East editor for L'Express News magazine. Vincent, welcome to the stream.
My pleasure.
Patrice, I want to start with you. For people who don't know or aren't familiar with Francafrique, kind of summarize that for us. Talk about its origin and policies and goals, really.
Yes, Francafrique is a tag word. It is a word used by leftist activists, Verschav, etc., to actually present or to describe France's foreign policy towards its former colonies. And since it is a tag word, it covers, let's say it is a word for battle. And yet at the same time, it presents a network of personal relations that related French presidents, particularly French presidents from the right, to mostly dictators who were installed after French-speaking colonies became independent in 1960. So roughly that will be the definition of Francafrique.
Vincent, so President Hollande says that Francafrique is over, yet there are ongoing military operations in Mali. There are about 4,000 soldiers on the ground there. Is the intervention in Mali really just a continuation of Francafrique?
I don't think so. that initially there are plenty of reasons to be extremely skeptical, if not suspicious, when you have such promises emanating from a French president. We do remember that Nicolas Sarkozy himself in 2006, 2007, during his electoral campaign, made excellent speeches in Cotonou, for example, or surprisingly enough in Bamako, promising the end of the era of the W's emissaries and so on and so forth. So obviously you have a certain amount of skepticism. But if we do consider what's going on in Mali, it's, to my mind, impossible to, assimilate what is going on with the past experience and adventures of France in Africa. Because basically France answered a call coming from the Malian authorities and from Malians themselves. All through the past months, I have been in permanent touch with friends in Tombouctou, in Gao, in Bamako. And most of them, if not all of them, were telling me, unfortunately, we cannot get rid of that new slavery imposed on us by jihadis, so we need your help. So you cannot say that it's exactly the same than when France was, rushing to rescue a despot who was confronted by his own population. It has nothing to do. And what is very interesting is that I dedicated most of my energy in the past 20 years to document and to denounce Francafrique and its misdeeds. So I think that it's not honest to say that it's just a continuation of something like this. Obviously, it's too early to say. And just to finish with that, I would like to underline that initially and historically, the very concept of Francafrique was considered as positive. It was created basically by Félix Houphouët-Boigny, right, the first Ivorian president who happened to be also MP in France and even a state minister. And in his mind, and in the mind of someone like François Mitterrand at the time, or even Charles de Gaulle, Francafrique was just an attempt to somehow perpetuate a privileged relationship between France and the former colonies. But obviously, it got weird very soon.
Let's go over to our online community. Jagag is saying Francafrique is the only system or tool for France, left or right government, to protect and promote its interest in Africa. And Salim says there is not any relationship except that they've robbed the countries and steal their wealth. So, Julie, I want to pose this question to you. Would you say that what France is doing right now is just a new mask for neocolonialism? Unmute yourself, Julie. Unmute yourself.
Yes, I have.
Great.
Hello, sorry. Yes, what I wanted to give some more precisions regarding the definition of Francafrique. It is obviously an influence network which is composed of political, economic, media protagonists, either in Africa and in France. That is important to mention. And also, it must be precise that that influence network goes beyond the control of French democratic institution and even some African democratic institution. And that's what makes it, I would call it, a bit dangerous and harmful for the relationship between both parts of the world. So in my opinion, it's difficult to call it neocolonialism, but obviously there are still some what I call bad habits that are difficult to get rid of and that make Francafrique resemble to a sort of neocolonialism. So that would be my opinion on the subject.
Sylvain, I'm curious, what's your perspective on how the French see the intervention in Mali? Do they support it? Do they see it in the interest of global security? What's your take on that?
From the French population, definitely it's seen as a positive action from President Hollande. And also, it's difficult for the French citizen maybe to have the right information about the intervention. But the use of words, fight against terrorism, the fight against jihadists, fight against rebels, really help the government to make it easy for the French population to support it. My opinion is this operation was welcome. As Vincent mentioned before, I don't think there is any France-Afrique network involvement in this specific operation in Mali. It's really security threat operation. And also something that has not been mentioned concerning this operation is François Hollande, when he arrived in power in May, he definitely didn't want to send French troops on the ground. He was asked many times to support military interventions, to develop military intervention, and he didn't want it. And if the offensive from Mujahou and Al-Qaeda in this Maghreb and Ansar didn't happen in January, I think we will still have the same situation and French troops will still not intervene. And it was a changing on the ground that made France intervene. And the problem is right now, there is the end game that was proposed by François Hollande at the beginning of the intervention is changing most of the time. At the beginning, it was just to stop the offensive. Now he's saying in new speeches that he was intervening for defending the women's rights. And after now, we need to eliminate the last, until the last jihadist. In one of his speeches says that. So the goal from the beginning of the operation to now have evolved with the time. But still, I don't see any France-Afrique network in this. And
I should have mentioned that Sylvain is an associate fellow at the French Institute of International Relations.
Sylvain, I'm actually going to pull in our online community, which is totally picking up on that point of positivity that you just mentioned. Mohammed says, in the case of Mali, France rescued its people from the extremists before it was too late. That's a big positive side. I also have a question from our community. Mohammed, I want to pose this question to you, so let's take a listen now.
Francafrique does live on, but definitely not through the war in Mali. A lot of people have been saying that the French intervened in Mali to seize all of Mali's natural resources, but the truth is they already had access to these resources long before the war. On the other hand, when you look at a country like Gabon, which has amazing resources as well, the Gabonese government has been granting really, really generous deals to a lot of French companies to exploit their soil. I think that's a far better example.
So Mohammed, what would you agree with what our online community member just said? Is Mali not exactly the case of, you know, being exploited for colonial gain, but really there are other countries in Africa that fit that profile much better?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I was saying that would you agree with our online community member who said that Gabon is a much better example of a former colony kind of exploiting its former colony than Mali is?
Well, let's say not exactly, because as Julie said, it's a mix of bad habits. Now, what we're discovering with this kind of relationship is you can change things from one year when François Hollande took the power in France. He was just trying to shape a new kind of relationship, but I'm just going to be able to make it happen very quickly. And regarding what is happening in Mali, it's exactly what defines the France-Afrique relation. France have to take action to make sure that what happened in the past, they're still getting involved and making the right decision and taking the right action to make things work.
Patrice, people in Mali, though, they seem to be happy about this intervention. They're supporting it. They asked the French military to be there?
Yes, I think I must say clearly that I was for that intervention. And even before, you know, the French actually decided to intervene, I had published an op-ed in Slate Afrique to say that one has to intervene in Mali because it actually warranted, a drastic move. But yet, I think we cannot talk about the cake without mentioning really, the plate itself. Because if we insist only on the Malian case, we're actually taking an exception. And what is important is that one has to always remember that France is, in Europe today, the only imperial power, I want to say, that, or at least the country that still behave as if imperialism hasn't died. So you will have to compare, in terms of the military, between England, for instance, and France, to see how many British soldiers you have in Africa and how many French soldiers you have in Africa. And you have to ask yourself if it is even thinkable that British soldiers will be in Nigeria, in Uganda, or in South Africa, or if British soldiers will be in Ghana, when in Cameroon it will be quite common sense. You will have to really remember that the highest you know, the most important, you know, French bases in Africa is in Djibouti. It is a very small country, but yet a country like Cameroon is practically surrounded by French bases. And you have permanent bases, for instance, in Gabon, in Central Africa, in Chad, and they are not there to, you know, to go away. They are not there to intervene if, you know, whatever happens. They are there to stay. And when we talk about, you know, the military and insist only on the Malian case, we're actually talking about something that is an exception. I wanted to underline that. Maybe we'll further talk about, you know, the economy. I don't know. Maybe we'll have the time to.
Yeah, no, we definitely will. Definitely will. But Vincent,
So
I want to
we'll
get to you on this idea of whether or not France has a legitimate reason to be in Mali. I mean, let's not forget that France was seeking help of other African countries, and there seems to be a lack of trust, particularly in Mali, that other African powers could help them get the job done.
But unfortunately, it's not only a question of trust or of mistrust. From day one, France tried to embark partners on board, African partners and European and Western partners. The problem is that with our European friends, we have also that problem of suspicion toward the previous French adventures on the African continent. But regarding the African partners, you know, I've heard for ages now reports, speeches about the building of a Pan-African force. You could fill your studio with all the documents related to that. But what have we seen so far? Nothing, or almost nothing. The situation is such that, in fact, with the Chadian and partly the Nigerian, you have some practical help, but the other forces, which are supposed to build something called MISMA, a Pan-African contingent, to help restoring the territorial integrity of Mali, is just a fiction. I'm very sorry to say that, but it's, you know, all my sources, be they French or African, told me the same. So, I mean, the day when we see the last French soldier leaving Africa would be a day of celebration. But unfortunately, it's too early. And again, the Africans themselves are saying that. And not only the chiefs of state, but also ordinary African I'm talking to whenever I visit the countries.
So, Sylvain, I want you to jump in here. I mean, there's a lot of this discussion seems to imply that François Hollande has some sort of ulterior motive here. But is it possible that he's really working on a genuine desire to protect and secure the country as well as secure his people, and he's just really working under this very dark shadow of France's neo-colonial history?
One point I would like to go back on that, and I think you will answer partly your question, is the fact that my problem is even with the concept of French strategy towards Africa. Today I would like someone to explain to me what is the French strategy in general for international relations, and in particular towards Africa. Today, if you speak to most of French politicians and people in ministries, they don't really care about Africa, they don't have much knowledge about what's happening in Africa, and if you speak to most of the people in the street of France, and even if you have a lot of African diaspora in France, most of the people don't really care about what's happening in politics or economy in Africa. And for example, I take one example at IFRI. When we set up the Sub-Saharan Africa program, there were no program about Africa for 20 years in Paris concerning focusing on African politics and African international relations. And we're supposed to be in a city where there's the most interest toward Africa. Secondly, when we went to see all the different sponsors, the potential sponsors, everyone was telling us our problem today is no one in Paris or no one in France and even in Europe is interested about what's happening today in Africa. And it's really difficult to get the access to people to find motivation to have the interest. And you have the old generation who didn't want to give his hand, but no one wanted to take the relay and take this interest. Also, it was, and when we're working at IFRI, it's very difficult also to find relay among the opinion or even in other countries. When you look around and you say, okay, what could be the next, what could be your other option? Everyone was getting excited a few years back about the fact that China and the US were back in
I'm
Africa.
so sorry to cut you off. I'm going to go back to our online community. I have Del Cook. He's saying, far from it. They declared the election to get their man in power in Cote d'Ivoire, moved into Libya, now Mali. A new scramble is taking place live on our TV screens. I also have a tweet here from Gela Pierre. He says African countries need to step up and take control of relationships with their international partners. So, Patrice, I want to pose this question to you. Would you agree that instead of debating what France's role is, maybe African nations need to step up themselves?
Oh, certainly, and I think not only African nations, but Africans, because we'll have to include, you know, the African diaspora there. I would rather, you know, first of all, like to say something about the fact that, you know, people in France will not be interested in Africa because it includes the word interest. It will mean that France doesn't have any interest in Africa. And I hope it is not what he wanted to say, because it is simply wrong. It's flatly wrong. If you go on the street in London, and 2 months ago I was in London, and you talk about you know, Africa on the street, of course people will not be interested. But it doesn't mean that Britain doesn't have interests in Africa. But then you know, the last British soldier already left, I think a couple of you know, decades ago. What are French soldiers doing in Africa? That will be the simple, you know, question that people are asking. But we already know the answer, and the answer is simply that those soldiers are there to help, you know, tyrants survive. And yet, when you look in Gabon, you have a family that has been ruling the country for now 50 years. If you look in Togo, it's the same thing. You look in Cameroon, it is somebody, you know, who's been ruling Cameroon now for 30 years. So Cameroon has had since 1960 only 2 presidents, and etc., etc., etc. So why are French soldiers there? It is indeed to support, to strengthen French interests, and to make sure that Africa doesn't slip away.
But there are, I mean, other countries like, you know, China and Africa, and not Africa, America, have a lot of interests in the natural resources that are across Africa. So some say this may be a strategy for France to sort of, you know, get its hooks in and, have access to these resources.
Oh yeah, clearly. And you know, I have even something, you know, something here for you, and I hope you will really show that, because if we talk about interest, we'll have to talk about currency. Here it is.
I want you to explain this. The CFA franc, that's, you know, a currency that's used.
Yeah, this is the quite famous franc CFA. It was created in 1945, and as you can hear, it is still called franc. So it is related to France. Why? Because it was in 1945 still called, you know, the currency of the French colonies.
But it's guaranteed by the French Treasury.
It is guaranteed by the French Treasury. One will have to imagine that, you know, the Federal Reserve of all French-speaking countries is in Paris. One will have to imagine that to simply understand that anybody, any thinking African who puts this in his or her pocket is indeed a slave already.
Well, this has the currency has a fixed exchange rate with the euro, so that is directly tied to the economic up and down that we've seen going on in Europe for the last couple of years. What effect does that have on these African countries economically?
It binds all those countries to France, and it transforms France into something like the godfather.
But does it create stability or instability?
I'm not sure there is any stability in French-speaking countries, because if you go from Rwanda, where you had a genocide, to Cote d'Ivoire, where you just had a bloody civil war, to the DRC, to etc., etc., those are countries where you have massive killings, massive wars. So that is not stability. It is not. And no number, no bank can guarantee the stability of a country that just had a civil war.
Right. We've got about 1 minute left in the program. Of course, we're going to continue this conversation, our online show. But before we go, Vincent, do you think France has an exit strategy for Mali? I mean, I know they're talking about pulling out troops starting in April, but what's your take on things?
Well, their problem at the time, and it was confirmed recently during conversations with top French planners, their problem is at least as political as military. Obviously, it's hard to get rid of the last network of jihadis in extreme northeast of Mali. But the problem, I think, is more a political one. When you look at the political chessboard in Bamako, a date has been set for general and presidential elections, and I think it's pretty incautious to say that by the end of July it will be possible to have free and fair elections.
Okay, Vincent, I'm going to have to stop you right there. We're going to pick this conversation up in our online post show. So for those of you who aren't already there, go to stream.aljazeera.com and we'll continue our discussion. Welcome to the Stream's online post show. I want to pick up our conversation right where we left off with Vincent Ujo. We were talking about whether you think there is an exit strategy on France's behalf to get out of Mali.
Well, officially there is one. I mean, what I'm pretty sure about is that France is eager to pass the ball to anyone ready to take it, be it African Union, be it UN, be it CEDEAO or ECOWAS, as we say in English, the regional economic and political body. But the problem again is that there are no volunteers to take the ball at the time. So basically, what I really would to throw in the arena is this. It's very true that you have die-hard and despicable habits related to Francafrique. It's very true that you have a dying tribe of obscure emissaries who are greedy, who want to save their interests and so on and so forth. But it's not the story of Mali. Regarding now what has been said about the only motivation for a country like France is to loot the natural resources of Mali, it's just a joke. It's not true. It's true in other countries, unfortunately. But look, globalization has ruined the kind of purpose you could imagine before, because you have new actors who sometimes are as greedy as the French were in the past few years, and Chinese, for example. So, I mean, it's just a dying tribe which is trying to save his interest there. Last thing about François Hollande himself. You know, to a certain extent, the fact that he is not familiar with Africa at all might be an asset. I mean, he has no debt, he has no friendship to save. So when he pretends being a normal president, my guess and my hope is that he would be able to normalize, which means not the Soviet style, Prague or Budapest, which means just making things abnormal, normal, which means that, as he said in his speeches, I mean, mutual respect, mutual interests, and normal relationships. So the challenge for him, beyond Mali, is this, because obviously you have still, and I will finish with that, you have still a certain amount of leniency, if not complacency, toward old-fashioned regimes like in Cameroon, like in Congo-Brazza, and so on and so forth. And Gabon has been mentioned. I'm sorry to say that, to my mind, and unfortunately, Gabon is still today the living museum and the archetype of the old-fashioned Francafrique.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pull in our online community here. Glider, I have a tweet from him. He says, I don't think it does. CFA's zone should be one of the leading currency regions, but due to corruption, etc., it's not. So going back to the issue of currency that we talked about earlier, Julie, I want to pose this question to you. What do you think the symbolism is of the fact that these countries are still using currency called the franc? The franc.
Well, a country's independency can also be judged by its ability to print its own money and to have its own monetary policy. So obviously for these 14 countries, we can question their independence in terms of financial and monetary policies. And I feel like, and I've written it in an op-ed last year, the CFA franc is an absolute nonsense in the 21st century, and it's as if some politicians still consider that some African states haven't reached adulthood yet to be able to manage their own currency. And it's absolutely nonsense. Once again, it's probably a harsh word, but that's what it is. And going back to the issue of Mali, well, it's very, indeed, there had to be something. No one can discuss the necessity of an intervention. But the question is, does it still have to be France at the forefront of this intervention? Of course, we've mentioned African countries' an to solve the issue. This is true. But on the other hand, saying that Mali is absolutely not about Francafrique is like, I'm sorry, it's about naivety. We also have to be aware of geostrategic, geographic issues as well. Mali is at the heart of the Sahel. Neighboring country is called Niger. Niger produces uranium, which is used by France, and which makes Areva one of the wealthiest companies in the world. Obviously, if you have instability in northern Mali, which is located in the Sahel, there are obviously problems with the possibility to supply that uranium back to France. So I totally disagree, and I'm asking for honesty. It's not about being, passionate or children to father relationship. It's about being realistic. We have to be realistic at some point and talk about this issue. They heard. We're not happy to recognize it.
Vincent, I want you to jump in here because Julie has a point. I mean, these are real geopolitical issues.
Look, it's true that at one time in the history, France had some kind of monopoly on Nigerian uranium, and there is a time when the Minister of Energy of the sovereign country of Niger was not aware of the quantity of uranium sent to France. This is unacceptable. Now look, the reality, because there was a call for honesty, the reality is that in the past few years, the Niamey regime under Mamadou Tanja yesterday, under Mamadou Issoufou today, has reconsidered first the price, then the range of clients and partners. And now you have in Niger partners coming from China, from Kazakhstan, from Canada, and so on and so forth. So obviously there is a French interest in uranium here, in mobile phones, in bridges there. But the reality is, again, that globalization has changed the face of this.
All right, and Vincent, I'm going to stop you there. Patrice, we've got less than a minute in the show. So go ahead and wrap it up first. Respond to Vincent and give us your final thoughts.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say quickly that one can have China or the US or whatever in any French-speaking countries, but as long as those governments, one, are set there by France, because many, or if not most of them, actually are legacies of French-imposed tyrannies. As long as you have those kinds of governments, you cannot talk about any French will, about any African will, about any African decision. But now, the second is that even if you have a partnership with China, as long as those governments that are set there by France pay with the franc, it means whatever they give back is tied to France.
And on that note, we're going to have to end it. So thanks to all of our guests for joining us today. But before we go, every year thousands of people head to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest. That is a film and music and technology festival where sites like Twitter and Foursquare got their first big push. This year the stream is part of it all, walking the halls of the festival's trade show. Malika took a look at some of the latest startups, all from her iPhone.
It's a 4-day showcase of some of the world's newest innovations, where almost everything you've ever wanted or didn't know you needed is at your fingertips. From the Allo Clip, a 3-way lens that turns your iPhone into a wide-angle camera, to Miko, a device that detects your brainwaves, then plays music to fit your mood. One of the biggest attractions can decipher more than what you're feeling. It can follow you around a room. Beam is a video conferencing device on wheels. It allows you to move, speak, and interact with others around the world in real time, all through a remote keyboard. But not all the festival's offerings are high-tech. 3M encouraged visitors to dream big and jot those dreams down on a giant Post-it note. And artist Yasuhiro Tominaga called in passersby to have their picture taken for his book, 10,000 Funny Faces. But the biggest attraction of them all isn't something you'll see in stores anytime soon. The arrival of retired basketball star Shaquille O'Neal had many people dropping their new toys and reaching for their cameras. Shaq's partnered with smartphone app Tout to find the next big tech startup at the festival. For more pictures, videos, and tweets from the team here at South by Southwest, head to our website, stream.aljazeera.com.
All right, so our thanks to Malika and the rest of our team at South by Southwest. Now on Wednesday's program, the U.S. military's rape epidemic. Some 19,000 servicemen and women are assaulted each year. How can the military better protect those who serve? Send us your thoughts and your questions on that. And until then, we'll see you online.